can't read anything.
It says you are live.
We're live. All right. All right, guys. Thank you for coming tonight, and I thank you for just taking the time to hear this story. It's interesting when people come to the barn and they say how peaceful it is, and that's what I want to get into tonight. Give you guys some of the backstory, because I'll tell you what. It's funny to me. I laugh inside. There's nothing that was peaceful about getting here. There was nothing that was presumably easy. And a lot of what I'm going to go into tonight, it's even interesting in Andy's prayer, and I thank you for that prayer. To be honest, to be authentic about it, and just to give the message. Because at the end of the day, I know we've talked about this, I literally realized in this story that I'm just one beggar showing other beggars where the bread is, if I can. If I can't, it's okay. So I do appreciate that. I appreciate you guys. And we'll open in prayer and we'll get to it, all right? Lord Father, I thank you for tonight. Lord, I thank you for the Holy Spirit. I thank you for truth. Lord, I thank you for trials, tribulations. Lord, I thank you for the areas that you broke me in my life. I ask for courage and I ask for your boldness tonight to just be very honest and to point everything back to you, to thank you for what you've done in my life, the fact that you've saved me from myself. And Lord, you've allowed me to die in myself, which needs to happen every day. But Lord, I ask for the power to just glorify you today in what you can do in the sense of a broken man's heart. In your name, Jesus, amen. So I thank you, men, and one of the things that has really captured my heart in preparation for this is that I think it's one thing, and we give out Bibles here for good reason, that and we give out highlighters, the whole thing, but the reason for me that I highlight, and I am like meticulous in my highlighting, meticulous on my notes, and just heard a sermon on this, that this Bible for me ends up being an altar of remembrance. And it's interesting as I'm preparing for today and I'm going through all this kind of stuff, more and more is still coming out. And this is like 11 years after the fact. And as I look at this, it is amazing the power that this thing holds. Everyone in my house knows where I keep this thing. Everyone knows where they can find me at the crack of dawn. Because I know that when I wake up, this thing is like an absolute cancer drug, that I need it, and I can't do life without it. And I will tell you that I've done life without it, and it did not work. It didn't work in a lot of ways. Just, we talked about last week real quick about our giftings, and in preparation for this, it's important to go back to the roots. And that's what I had to do with counseling and when I went through it. And male, female, we all have gifts. And what starts to break my heart is that these gifts are great. They make us money, they get us power, they bring a paycheck, they might do whatever. They might give fame, you might be able to rock a guitar, whatever these gifts look like. But what's interesting in a neutralizer for me is that these gifts, the moment that we walk through the door, they don't matter really to our wives. They don't matter at all to our kids. As a matter of fact, a lot of my gifts steamroll, don't listen. But when I'm in my setting where my gifts can prosper, things go okay. It seems like an oiled machine, in my broken opinion, until you really start to get deeper in that and you start to realize the brokenness with that. So I thank you for just walking through this journey with me. Looking at this, and it's just easier from the outside because the furnace for this thing was really hot for a lot of years, and it was very lonely. And as I meet with you guys and I get to talk with you guys, I understand the heart of a broken man. I understand when you're lost. I understand when there's no direction. I think that's dangerous for a man to walk around without direction, without purpose. And I think Satan's biggest plan for us is to create doubt. And with doubt, without direction, that's when bad things can happen to us. That's when we start stumbling into things. That's when we leave things open. The good news is for tonight, we can get into this, and I will be self-deprecating in the sense that I'm going to be honest with you and let it rip with, in the sense of how good my God is. For a lot of men, it comes down to performance. And I was raised in a good home, mom and dad that loved me. My dad was a guy that you get it done. Like you absolutely get it done. So you start getting these seeds that you start going through as you find counseling and you start doing this. My second grade teacher convinced my mom that I needed to start getting a job at, a fast food restaurant because I'd never graduate high school. And it is amazing to me that those words hung. I had a third grade teacher that spoke the opposite of life into me, and I loved her dearly. Mrs. Dawson, still remember her name, but the ones that hung with me and haunted me, still even as an adult, were from that second grade teacher. So we start there, they're like, holy cow, now all of a sudden I'm gonna go back to that. Now I'm gonna go back to the second grade teacher where why am I lying to my wife? Why am I looking at porn? Why am I buying every toy that I want, thinking that's gonna fill me up? Why am I recklessly spending money? I look at all these things and it just doesn't make sense. But now as I'm starting to get healthy and I bring people into my life that I trust and counsel, this stuff starts to get explained. And one thing that is really interesting, and this is for women that may be watching, but more for men, my mom was a prayer warrior. My dad's faith before he passed turned, and it was one of the greatest things that he could have given me before the Lord took him home early, was watching him get baptized. But every morning I would walk up and my mom would read this ratty old white Bible. And the fact that she had me as a son is the reason I was ratty, because she had a lot to be praying for. And I knew my name was all over this thing. That's the blessing that we can give generationally when we can't control. We have to have our nose in the Word and praying generationally as it goes. So we sit on the word performance. What does performance look like? I wasn't good at school. Even if I was done. Because now I'm stubborn. I just assumed I wasn't, but my identity was going to be in sports. So I dove into everything with soccer. And my mom would always ask, it was like something, like a switch would go when I'd go on the field, like I was trying to kill somebody. And I think what was really starting to manifest that I couldn't even articulate it was, I wasn't happy. Like I literally was not gonna have my identity wrecked by somebody or a bad situation or whatever that looked like. And it starts to build fast, right? Went to play college soccer, and I had an opportunity at this point. I was sick of soccer. I was losing the heart for it. And I had an opportunity to go play tryout for a semi-pro team. And this just started to come up. And it was interesting that when I went to this tryout, I was like a half a step slow. Like I knew I was slow. I knew I wasn't gonna get it done. And I vowed on that field, and I'm telling you, I could have wrote it in my own blood, that never again would I get beat. Never again would someone do something faster than me. Never again would that happen to me. So I'm gonna go into some of this where counseling and all this stuff. I can have a lot of things happen to me, and it doesn't faze me. My 30th birthday, I had a gun put between my eyes. Jesse, that's sitting over here, was gonna be due the next day. It's no big deal. It didn't really affect me. I don't know why. Maybe I need more counseling for that. I could shake it off. I wanted to try to do a marathon. I broke my os trigonum off at mile 8, which is like a bone in the heel. And it got wedged in my Achilles. And I started to just pretty much call myself a loser. Like, what are you doing? And by 3 miles later, I could get the pain and the numbness to go away, and I just finished. With this, it's performance. You talk about pushing things through, and you talk about going. That's what I'm capable of. And I want to go back to my word. Being my word is the altar of remembrance. We just heard a sermon where we talk about, are you on the altar or are you off the altar? I know full well what I'm capable of off the altar, and it's not good, and nor would I want to be around myself. But this is the story that God redeemed a lot of these things and brought light. And again, I appreciate you guys being here. But for me personally, this is where the barn started in this story. As a young kid, as I'm going through all this, my grandma had a neighbor that was in the think tank at GE, most brilliant guy you've ever met. And I would do these projects with him. And this guy set a seed in me that morphed into a lot of things that really were into my giftings. But he explained to me that anyone can do a job. Anybody can hand me a tool. But how good are you, Jamie, that you think about everything, but you get 3 steps ahead of everybody? And I'll never forget that conversation. We're sitting over this little bike trailer. He's sitting on a scotch with a little cigarette. That's all this guy did. But it was amazing what that talk did to me. It ignited a flame in me. It wasn't good. Again, on the altar or off the altar, right? I'm just trying to find my way. I'm a broken kid, just trying to make things right. It's amazing how people, and we can be in situations that people speak into us, and sometimes it's not by ill meaning, but it sows a seed of death. It sows a seed of destruction. But this is part of the story. This is what God has to do to work through. And as I go through all this kind of stuff, support is important. I have a men's group that I've met with probably for the last 17 years, every Friday morning. Don here is a brother of mine. Andy, you guys, I love the fact that when you guys start to share, I got a guy at work at Chad that probably is one of the deepest character that I've ever met in a man. What I've learned, and I just learned this again, this is a sermon I heard this week. When you're on the altar and you meet guys that have the gift of giving, the gift of just, getting things done, or these gifts, it's amazing on the altar that you're not jealous. Off the altar, you're extremely jealous. But this is what's great when you have people that are, not that they're better than you, but the way that God has designed them, it pushes us, and it pushes us as men closer to the Lord. Never thought about it that way, but that's truth. We're all broken. But it's the things that we glean and we push to oneness in that. To start this, my dad passed at 53. He's a young man, worked a ton, flying all over the country, had a lot of responsibility. It's funny, I was reading this back there and it sort of caught me off guard. It was tough when he died because I didn't have a great relationship with him, but I was in the process of building this relationship back with him. It was maybe a year or two that we were working on this. And in that, he came over July 4th, and my dad was the vice president of sales for this large company. They got almost literally thrown out of Meyer for running around, which my dad did not do any of that. My dad was, he carried himself in a way that he didn't like to be embarrassed. But that was just out of his nature. And that 4th of July that I got to spend that dinner with my dad was the last. And I'm thankful for that. But I'm also thankful the fact that the way he raised me with hard work, tremendous hard work. When I got married to my wife, when my boys were born, I thought everyone got up at 7 a.m. to do chores. I didn't even know there was commercials or cartoons. It's how I was raised. So you can see already that now, like even the way that from a broken earthly way that I lean in on my boys, the way that I want things done, I start demanding, I start pushing on this stuff, it's a brokenness. It's a brokenness deeper than I felt. And when I talk to you guys, but what I really feel in my heart is those times that you're driving to work and there's just a tiredness of soul. When you're sitting in your truck or you're sitting in your car and you're literally throwing punches in the air, you're just cussing and swearing at the steering wheel, because you're out of just options and answers and the whole thing in that weariness. Those are the triggers that I hope that you hear these words and I point you back to a wholeness in Christ, because this is where I want you guys to stay away out of that red zone, the danger zone. I know that. Dave Rutz talked about that when he said all the cards were in. I remember the day, I remember the road, I remember exactly where I was in West Bloomfield cutting across 12 Mile when I was done. I loved his expression. Cards are in. I'm out. This is right after my dad died. That funeral was so lonely for me. You got a lot of friends in life. You got a lot of whatever's going on, but that really hit me that was rock bottom. I was overweight, had a food addiction problem, still struggle with that. But it was interesting that people come up to me and my dad's laying in a casket dead, and they're like, "Man, you look just like your dad." I'm like, "Really?" in the way that I took that, though, I got performance, lack of performance. My dad that I knew that he loved me. He was breaking his own generational curses with his dad and did 10 times better than his dad. But I need to own my own stuff. And that day was really hard. I only remember one brother coming through a door that I got a hug from Dave from my small group. And that was the connection that I had through that whole thing, was him. In that loneliness when there's death, that loneliness when your wife doesn't like you, that loneliness when you're ready to lose your job or you did lose your job. These are things as men that we get it, we get each other. We were just talking the other day, we are deeper than we realize. As much as we don't get credit for this with society, we are much deeper creatures than at face value. The puddle's deep. With probably, my wife and I spent, I don't even know, let's call it 15, 20 grand in marriage counseling. None of it worked. It just didn't. She went away to get some training, and actually the first day she went to go get training to be a counselor was the day my dad died. And in that, she met the Tuckers that were down in Southern California, and then I started seeing Bob over Zoom, and this gentleman is like a spiritual father for me. If you were to walk in right now, I think I'd literally melt with tears for introducing me to Jesus. I can't say enough for the gift that this man gave me. He came alongside me. He walked me through it. It was so special there, and I'm jumping ahead of myself, but at the end of the story, before I left and came home, and it wasn't good when I came home, I knew no matter what we started, or what I encountered there in California, what he showed me and what he taught me, which is just right out of the Bible, I knew that we needed to bring it here. And I know that it's because of my own heart, the way that it filled my heart, the way that I needed it, the way that I needed the answers, the way that the world was failing me. It was the first time in my life that I felt a joy. It's interesting when I go through what I did with him and sharing his secrets. I would read a book of the Bible every day. He's like, hey, I want you to read Ephesians. Okay, what chapter? Ephesians. Okay, I got you. Then I would journal that out, but then I would bring him a nugget to see what the Lord had for me and how he spoke to me. He talked to me about purity as a man. I've heard different things on purity, but not the way that when he wrapped it up with Jesus, what that purity looked like, how much it would mean to me, my idols. Then you looked at the fact of codependency. And in the end, one of the things that was really interesting as I was going back through my notes, a deliverance prayer. The interesting thing about a deliverance prayer and all the things that he went through, and I had a softer heart, and I started to see a lot of my errors. And as I was learning and pulling a heart that had more towards Christ, it was amazing the things that I let into my heart. It was amazing the things that I didn't push back on, the things that I accepted, the things that I would let happen, my passivity. And it was the start of a lot of things that I'm still working on that I had to address, that I needed him. I needed a relationship with the Lord that I understood more than anything else. I needed a relationship that I was not worried about a man being sad at me or not owning or not, performing at work, not performing in my marriage, however that looked. My reverent fear to him needed to be bigger and bolder than anything to a human standard. And that's where I'm starting to get an introduction to all of this. And for the big one that we really need to get into with men, and I know that statistically this is changing, and it is changing at an alarming rate for women, but this is a men's Bible study. He got into the Beatitudes about holding, a covenant with your eyes. I know that's Job, but protecting your eyes, protecting your heart, but not looking at another woman lustfully, and where it starts at a heart condition. And as he started to explain these scriptures to me, I was so convicted because I just thought, okay, I promised Joy I would never go to a strip joint. Never went to a strip joint. I wasn't picking up, prostitutes at work. So I'm checking all these boxes. But yet I'm clicking on porn, and I'm lying to my wife, and I'm going through all this. And there's some generational stuff, but I didn't think that was a problem because I wasn't touching anybody. I didn't have anything to do with anything. And as he was walking me through this, it was like I was like trying to learn Spanish for the first time because I didn't understand this purity thing that he was talking about, but I also didn't understand the why and the who. And as soon as he started bleeding Jesus into this thing, I really was like, oh my gosh, like this guy actually, he's good. Like he's actually got a good point. But I didn't really know this Jesus guy yet. So this is all over Zoom, and we're going through this, and I remember in my basement, and then he gets into the topic of masturbation. I'm like, dude, you're off, there's no way. Like every guy I know, that's all you joke about in locker rooms, there's jokes about all this kind of stuff, and he's like, no, it's purity. And it was that day that with him being prayed over, that it stopped. And it was amazing. And the one thing I'm going to give an encouragement to anybody, that act will help stop porn. It just does. And it will help in the marriage. It will help in these things. It won't be easy, but it's amazing the power that has, especially when you look at it clinically, when you look at what it does to you mentally, when it does your chemicals, the whole thing. But God is so good that He designed us, developed us in this way for it to work that way. But we're never taught that stuff. We're never, ever gone through that. The other one that I struggled with was, your wife doesn't like you. You go home, it's just tough. However you want to define tough. So for me, I was raised Irish Catholic, so the best thing you do is you start having a glass of wine when you get home. Right? Just takes the edge off. Because if I take the edge off, then I'm cool with my boys. I can just chill, I can be relaxed. Well, one became two. And then I remember now I'm starting to hide the bottle, and I'm looking at the bottle trying to figure out, is that milliliter smaller than the other milliliter, which I'm in sales, I'm not a chemist, which now, here's your first point, you got maybe a problem, right? So I start talking to Bob about this, and he's like, you need to stop, like this is not good. Like, look at what you're doing. And they say it in recovery that, the first person you're gonna lie to yourself before you start lying to others. And that was me. Bob was able to speak into the secret areas of my heart, but because he was so free, he had no problem taking a flashlight and running at me. And that was loving, because he told me the truth. As hard as that was, and isn't it interesting, and he taught me this, that most all liquor stores you go by, on the front of it, it says beer, wine, and spirits. I never realized that until I was driving around Detroit the other day, and it was like, man, that guy's right. Like, all of these things, beer, wine, and spirits. And what are you going to open? What are you going to allow in? What numbing juice are you going to have? I don't think there's anything wrong with alcohol. I think that one glass is fine. But if you're someone and you got a problem with it, one drink is too much, and 1,000 drinks isn't enough, you got a problem. Right? So as I'm walking through all this stuff with this guy, this is what's coming out. And what's interesting about him, in the end, when I was in California with him, we'd get in these sessions, and he'd sort of have this like weird look to him. And finally, near the end, I'm like, what is going on? You look like you're ready to fall asleep. I know I'm boring, and he starts laughing. He's like, what are you talking about? And it was really interesting. He goes, you know what, Jamie? When I sit with you, I ask the Lord for me to hear in the Spirit. I ask for Him to show me what I'm not hearing in your words. And it is amazing what you learn from someone that is just farther along, because our hearts are misleading, our words can be misleading, but the Spirit is always true. Biblically, it supports it in the Word. The Spirit is always true, it's always honest, it's always right. And that's the things that I try to pray for in my marriage, in meetings, in work, and I am fallen, I get that. But that's what I ask, that's what I seek for. Because those are the things that I really hold on to. We're sort of lied to enough and you don't know who to believe. But the one, again, source that we can go to is Him for that. For His goodness. So my cards are in. I'm on 12 Mile. and it's not enough. And this Zoom stuff's not working for me. It's just not. So I go to California. And because I'm trying to be responsible, I start selling all the toys so it doesn't affect my family financially. Motorcycles are gone, all that kind of stuff. Just liquidate everything, buy the tickets, and I start to go to California. I still remember the area of the airport that I was dropped off. All my kids are sitting there and bawling. They know something's up. I'm crying now, knowing that when I get back I may not be married. But I did know that I had to let go and I had to do this. And again, that's why I'm thankful for Bob, that he pushed me and really encouraged me that I had to do this. Because the one thing I have a hard time loving myself, doing things for myself, which there's a fine line of being selfish with that. But in this, I knew that I was done and I needed something. And everything that I was going to was like salt water, and it was not quenching my thirst at all. And in that, I showed up to the airport, got dropped off, and in that, it's an interesting question that he asked me, or what he already told me. He said, when you walk down to that airplane and you cross over that aluminum threshold, he goes, I'm asking that you die to yourself and you ask the Lord to bring me Jamie at 6 years old. And I remember stopping on that threshold, praying that prayer as I walked over, and I'm on my way to California. Couldn't talk to my family for the first 7 days. Just a funny story with the alcohol. I actually asked Bob if I could bring like wine with me, because I was like, this is funny. With the conversations we're having, he's laughing. He's like, dude, do you not get what we're doing here? You know? So I hope that some of you can understand that, but I have to throw that in there that I'm sort of a slow study sometimes trying to get that. Showing up to California, I read the curriculum wrong, of course. And I was supposed to do like a Celebrate Recovery or an AA twice a week. Whatever that means. Never been to one, didn't even know what it was at all. But I read it wrong. So every night I would try to find these meetings. I don't even know what I'm looking for. But in these meetings, if you've never been, I know we talked about this a few weeks ago, those meetings were everything to me at night for me to understand that how bad someone needs faith, how bad someone needs Jesus. They give you a chip for being 1 day sober. You're day to day. That's why my word is day to day. But in that, you do not understand that people lose their lives, families and their lives, but this is how much they hold on to it. And some of them are white knuckling. You even heard Blake Love where he talked about it. Sometimes you're running months, just praying like, God, get me through this. Keep working. But watching this night after night after night for I think it was like 13 nights, I'll be really honest, when I would walk in, I was embarrassed out of my mind. I don't belong here with these people. But when I walked out of there with goosebumps, I needed to figure out what they had that I didn't. That's what was interesting about those meetings. In that, I started to understand what codependency was. We did these workshops with this lady, Teresa. We were there, didn't even know what codependency was. And in this, we'll get into that a little bit more, but it was amazing to start to see this book. You look at family of origin, you start to understand what codependency looks like. We do a study here at the barn on it. I encourage you guys to do it with your wives. Bob Tucker's wife, Stephanie, did the curriculum. I think she's got a couple versions of this. Very gifted, but this book that she does is really amazing to help sort of peel the onion back and to get you to understand a lot of these things, labels, and just perspective. It starts to define things and help you realize maybe what's off, what wasn't right, a little accountability maybe if needed. One of the things that they had me do is I met with this guy named James, and he was married to this lady Cecilia that came in through this program, and this dude was a cool guy, and his story would be his story to tell. I don't think that'd be fair, but you can obviously, he's not there for, good reasons. He's there to get right and to know it's Jesus. And this guy really walked through a very broken marriage. But what he explained to me and what he talked was a boldness and repentance. To understand that when you ask for forgiveness, or your wife now doesn't trust you at all, and she starts questioning you about everything, that's okay. Just answer the question. She may not like the answer, but you answer the question. And the freedom that this guy had was captivating to me. What this guy put his wife through, just amazing. But his heart for his wife now was even more amazing. The purity of it. How it set this guy free. All of these things are coming into me, just getting poured in through all these different avenues. There was a little church we go to once a week, and this is what I would do before one of the meetings or after. It's this tiny little church. I'm sitting right up front, taking notes. I'm really getting excited. And now that I'm looking back, I can feel the Spirit moving. And it's a tiny little church, this massive wooden cross. And so I stayed off campus because I didn't have like drug or alcohol problems or whatever. But I'm sitting there and I'm looking at this cross and I'm just really excited. And one of the kids, young kid, cool kid, comes up, taps me on the shoulder, and he says, "Hey man, we sit in the back." And as soon as he said that, I was looking around like it was a bad joke. I'm like, "What do you mean we?" And so he just went back to his seat. And I remember looking up at that cross. And I'm like, and that's when it hit me. And I'm like, "You're no better than anybody. Like, who do you think that you are, that you're no better than anyone? And just own it." I looked at that cross, and it was this old big wooden cross, and I'm looking right at the base of that cross. And that's when it hit my heart that I'm like, you can call me whatever you want. You can put whatever label you want on me, which is still hard today, but at that time, I started to feel the freedom coming when I understood that cross. So I got up, packed up all my stuff, and I went back and sat with them in the back of the room. What's interesting about that sermon corresponded with Celebrate Recovery, that corresponded with the Bible verse that James was doing. All this stuff starts just, like, it's literally like orchestrated, right? So you look at work, you look at the biggest problem with work or marriage and all this stuff, you talk about communication, and I'm just thinking, man, this dude, Bob, is amazing. I sit down with him, I'm like, man, how do you get everyone to like finish verses? And I show up all the way across town. They're literally in the same book of the Bible. They're finishing what this guy started. Like, how do you pull all this together so fast? And he starts laughing at me. He's like, "I don't know what you're talking about." And he goes, "The fact that you experienced that," he goes, "I don't even know." And here's the funny thing. He didn't even know where I was with Celebrate Recovery because I read the thing wrong. It's probably supposed to be in my room or whatever I was doing. The reason I point this out is, number one, my palate was being changed. My heart was being transformed. The other thing is that the Spirit is of truth. We talked about that. The Spirit is also redundant, that it will keep messages going. It'll keep something that's fluid in our lives, just like the Scripture. You question what's in this book, everything will be supported over. Everything will support that, even if that's 400 to 1,800 years before. We saw that in the book of Daniel when Andy was doing that. Everything talks to everything, and that's how the Spirit works in our life when we open our hands to let that in. This is the Saturday morning, so I'm a weekend. So that's all I'm doing is counseling. I'm either counseling, running, or reading my word. That's all I'm doing. Saturday morning, I'm sitting there, I'm journaling. I have this big workbook to do for Bob, and it's all through Scripture, the whole thing. I'm in a Starbucks, and in between like my Bible and I'm writing on this kind of thing, I see these words that say, "You were no mistake." Okay, no big deal, right? It wrecked me. How could those little words wreck me? They wrecked me in a way that when you talk about the ugly cry, you got snots, you got all this kind of stuff coming out. You know, when the Apostle Paul says, "I don't know why I do what I do." Do you remember, like, when you're apologizing to your wife, "I don't know why I do what I do"? I actually use those words on joy, and I didn't even know Scripture. This is where it starts to make sense. This is where now I'm going to start bringing you guys into the focus to where I started to see this. So I start journaling like crazy. what in the heck this thing means. Start connecting dots. And I will tell you, I think that when I was done with this, I think it was 8 pages long. I did a lot of journaling, and I would have to read it to Bob. And there was not one journal that I read back to him that I couldn't stop crying because I was getting purged from just a lot. Still have a lot to do, still have a lot to go. But in this one triggered me. So my mom and dad, she was 17, he was 18, got pregnant before they were married. And my grandpa pretty much didn't want me around, so made it so my mom could get an abortion. And my mom gave my dad the ultimatum that I'm having the kid, you're either with me or you're not. Okay? This is what's interesting, guys. Go back to performance. Go back to self-talk, go back to all these kinds of things. Start connecting these dots with me. Because this is now what my wife's fighting. This is what happens at work when you and I, lock horns. This is what you're getting. I am taking on that I don't belong here, or that someone wanted to take me out even before I belong here. My grandma really never liked my dad till he died. We didn't have a lot of money growing up. I took all this on as my fault. If I wouldn't have been born, none of this would happen. None of it. My grandpa was just not a good guy. That was his own thing, had nothing to do with me, but I sort of wore it. Like I started to cause this. Never did I ever realize, never did I put on that this in any way, shape, or form. I never connected the dots. But the way my body reacted, the way the shame, now you know why you act the way you do in a field. Now you know why you act the way you act in a business meeting. Now you know the way that you talk to your wife at the kitchen island. That's also killing me because I'm seeing all this stuff and it's just this flood of emotion, but it's truth. It's as he's walking through this. And I'm gonna warn at this point, my wife wanted to use this term, trigger alert, and I'm gonna be very respectful with this. I work in hospitals, and there was Lord, I could use help with words. So we do cases, and I was waiting for a case, and to give you perspective, it was 11:30 at night. I love to work. I mean, I probably wasn't getting home till 3 in the morning. So I'm sitting there waiting for a case, and I found out that there's an abortion in the room before us. And let's just say that everything that I got to experience that evening set in a lot of things that really added to this, and I couldn't find the words. I could not articulate it. I couldn't find it. This is why I still go to counseling. Bart Reed, that does a lot here with us as men. I see him personally. I see him professionally. These are a lot of the things that I'm still working on to make sure that I get healthy. I'm able to articulate things, to talk about this stuff, to get it out. And again, I see a counselor now. Bob, all Bible. Bart Reed, all Bible. This is interesting. Any problem that I have with any of the stuff that I'm dealing with inside my heart or with work, everything is through the Word. That's what's remarkable about this guy. What I think that I know of the Bible, I'm next to a guy that knows it 50 times fold that I do, but he doesn't give me any answers. He points me back to Scripture, just like Bob Tucker. This is my encouragement. None of us should have answers for anything. What we should know is know our Jesus in a way that we can delicately and very lovingly with truth point brothers back. As I saw what I saw, it was amazing just what and how much impact that had on me. And I started to really see what needed to happen and what was going on, and it just affected me. I didn't know what to do with it. I unpacked it with Bob. I read to him that morning, and then right after that I had a codependency class. And the words that she was using, I wasn't raised in the church. I didn't know any of this stuff. And I remember just catching her afterwards, and I asked her, like, when I'm going through these like Christian words, Like, what does this mean? Like childlike questions, to the point where she's looking at me like, you don't know what this means. I couldn't get my head around it. The Bible talks a lot about not having eyes to see or ears to hear. I get that. Because that's why I was in darkness. That's why I couldn't get to him, because I couldn't understand it. It was like a foreign language. She broke this down in a way, and the first thing I did is I got in that car, got my running stuff, ran to the beach, and I took off in a sprint. And I can tell you guys, I remember exactly in the corner of the house. We went to California, and I showed my kids the exact corner where this happened. I showed them the picnic table that I would read at. But at that corner, the way that I explain it, when I started going through all this stuff and the Lord just started working, it was like you see a documentary about an old Navy shipyard, and you see those old chains that have been sitting there for years, but they still got the grease on them. That's what I felt was falling off me. Physically falling off me, and all of a sudden I got this cry of relief. I don't think, looking back on this, that it was a cry. I think it was a cleansing. Because they were dirty, they were nasty. I was tired of carrying them. And what was interesting, they were never meant for me to carry. And that was when I finally wised up, and he finally gave me that truth that I could relinquish that and let those go. I still have a propensity to pick them up and carry them. This is why I got good brothers around me that call me out on it. That's why I still go to counseling. I still make sure that I'm trying to be humble. Good things grow in a humble heart. But that's a hard one. It just is. But it's something that I know that I desire to be closer to him. How much time do I got? It was in that freedom that I found when I went to drive home, and I remember coming around this Pacific Coast Highway 1. Again, I remembered that everything that I was experiencing, everything that was going on, I needed to some way bring this back to Michigan. And it wasn't about me, but I wanted to bring the Jesus that the Tucker family was showing all these people. I wanted to duplicate that, literally like ask them to steal the formula and bring it back. Because I was not seeing it, I'd never felt it. Maybe I did, I missed it, and I wasn't ready for it. That's how special it was. There was an interesting story. Maybe it's you guys, maybe it's someone you know. I was waiting for a session with Bob, and this gentleman had been working the program or whatever, and it wasn't working out, and he was lipping off to Bob. He was just disrespectful. And he left that morning, and it was a one-way exchange. Bob was just sort of listening, and he walked out, and I looked at Bob. I'm like, "Is that all right?" And Bob just said, "You know, Jamie, some things are just God's. It's not mine to worry about. Cool as a clam. Just let it go." And he said, "What you'll learn whenever you're dealing with people and you deal with a personal relationship with the Lord, he'll wreck people where he needs to wreck them. He'll get their attention where he needs to get them." And for me, I'm somebody that I like to control it. It's a performance thing for me. Like, I want to own it. And here I'm watching the owner of this thing, it's like water off a duck's back. But again, I'm getting to know him, that I was like, man, that's an attribute that I would really like to have. To be able to just say, you know what, man, stay in your lane. Let God work how God needs to work. I found out the next day that on the way home, this dude got hit head on by a truck. What was interesting for me is I knew the way that I run my life, the way that I push through things, I felt like that message was for me. That, buddy, you better figure this out and be submissive to the Lord in the way that I'm asking you, because he's been really nice on putting a 2x4 to my mouth when I need it, or wrecking me in ways that I've needed it. It's to the point where I would never challenge the Lord to do or to move in my life. In that story, as much as I hope that guy's okay, and I know that he was recovered and he was okay, but it was interesting for me, one, from a leadership standpoint, how far I needed to come, still working on it, from what Bob was teaching me and showing me, but in the same breath, from a son, and going back, I know what I'm capable of off the altar, But every day when I spend time in the Word, I'm asking the Lord to just please keep me focused on the altar. It's not perfect. It's not good. It's not. My sons are here. You can ask them. I'm a work in progress. So going home, my wife doesn't like me, right? But the interesting thing was, I knew all of the areas that I'd done wrong. I knew that I was forgiven. And James had prepared me in a way that these conversations are going to be really dicey. They're going to be really tough. And probably didn't talk to me for a couple days. Then all of a sudden it started coming out. She was angry and good for good reason. Your husband is not being honest with you, looking at porn. It's trust. It's a lack of character, right? So I have to throw this story in that was funny. So she had me open up all the gun safes because she wants to see what else you're hiding, right? So I'm like, okay, no problem, right? I knew it was a clean bill. And I will tell you, this is crazy. So we're in sales. I'll tell you this. How about I just build up to this? So I open the little safe, and there's like a stack of $1 bills wrapped in 100. She's like, what's this for? How do you explain to your wife that you've got a whole stack of $1 bills, right? And you're already having this stuff with porn, you already have this, and there's got to be more. You got to be up to, and I'm like, oh Lord, this is not good. And I will tell you, I'm not good at finding emails and that, but I will tell you, I have never prayed over that laptop looking for the email that I sent out to the sales team, because we were paying them for like answering the questions right, but we wrapped it in $100 bills, so they thought it was all hundreds or whatever. So it's like that whole thing. But I will tell you, when you look at the fact that when your spouse doesn't trust you for good reason, you have to stay protected. You have to stay in the armor. And the other thing too, men, it's important that we stay with men of good character, that we do make the right decisions. If it gets tough, we lean on someone else. That's why we have counsel. That's why we have men in our lives. It's just important. I thought that story was, talk about going down a rabbit trail quick. I probably could have got hung for that one. You know what I mean? But in the end, this is what and how he works. So as I came home, and some of the things that were really, this one hurt a bit. This one stung. I was picking up my daughter from church or something like that down over in Wixom, and we got to a stoplight, and I'd play this game with the kids that I learned from another counselor, so I did get something out of those counseling sessions. What are two things that Dad does that you like, and what are two things that Dad does that you don't like? So it starts this conversation, and it's been a good thing, because I've learned a lot of things what I need to stop doing. And I thank them for the transparency. I thank them for leaning in on me with that. It also is, I'm very appreciative of them to understand that Dad's still a work in progress. And in some areas, you're still watching Dad grow up. But it was interesting what Faith said to me. She looked at me and she's like, Dad, I like you now with Jesus. I'm ready to start crying. I'm sitting at this light. I go, well, what do you mean by that? And what I'm telling you guys is I thought I had those two in her hoodwinked. Again, on performance, the outside of the cup's clean, just like the rest of the world. I don't want you to think that I don't belong here. I will do anything to convince you of that. So the reason I was telling you those stories about the gun and the bank and all these things, that stuff doesn't affect me. But if I think that you don't think I belong here, it hurts me so deep to a level that it makes me dance sometimes. This is what would cause this. This is why when California freed me from a lot of this set me free. But isn't it interesting how sometimes in life, when you start putting this stuff together, you get deeper, you start looking at this. This is the freedom, these are the lies that Satan loves to hang on, that you don't belong. If it's okay to share, I know that we had someone that took their life that you knew of him. It does make sense to me. I think Satan gets so deep into our minds. Why are you here? People would be better off without you. I'd be lying if I hadn't heard those words before. But I sit with enough men that when our confidence gets shot, when we lose identity, when we lose purpose, that's what's so important about today in our society, that we've got to stay, especially as men, identity, purpose, and direction, right? This is why I think the other side of it too, you look at these young men and what they're doing with these schools, without being too forward on this, we have got to make sure that these young men know that they have purpose and identity.
Yep.
But let me ask you this, who's saying it to us? Society tells us to be tough. I mean, Andy's gone through this in a lot of his things. That's what we're taught. Don't feel, don't do all this. We are never designed to be soft. One thing I learned from Bart Reed, it was really interesting. There's a big difference between a dictator and a king. A dictator throws spears to kill. This is how I fought with my wife. She threw a spear, I would pick up the spear and I'd make sure that I threw it harder. It's how I operated in business. It's how I did life. But when you start to understand what a king looks like, when you look at David, a man after God's own heart, even when he had the chance to kill Saul, he didn't. But gentlemen, make no mistake that a king still carries a sword. And this is what's so refreshing when you learn about leadership, you learn about what it is to be a man. We still are to carry swords and we still know what war tastes like. That's what we do when we go to work. Purpose and identity. That's why we need, it's not that I have to go to work, that I get to. That's where we go to war. That's where we sometimes have to wash the blood off when we come in the house. That's where our gifts carry as far as the doorstep as we cross over. That's where we have to get an overflow of the Lord instead of relying on our gifts. God already knows. It's not that he cares. He wants a good earthly dad that's broken, that's humble, and is going to be a servant. And as I say these things, they are not easy. I get that. That's why I appreciate that you guys are here. That's why I appreciate that iron sharpens iron, that we get to talk about this stuff, that we get to walk through this and move into oneness. I know we have 7 minutes, and sometimes we do questions. Do you guys have any questions or anything, or you want to go through, or?
Yeah, I got a question.
Yeah.
So when you go to California, because it's easy to give lip service to people.
Yeah.
And we've all done that, and many times in our life, especially to our spouse, and people who want to hold us accountable. But, something really pricked your heart to actually decide, I'm going to California. And then when you got there, it wasn't a joke. It wasn't like counseling, like all this different stuff, right? So like you were humble.
Yeah.
Like, talk about a little of that humility, because what I see is it continues through your walk. Like that was years ago, several years ago.
Yeah.
And I think for a lot of guys, it's like at one point, they feel like they're getting a little bit humbled. They come to Jesus and that's kind of it. And then I see their walk kind of level out and really stagnant and really just drop off the face of the planet.
Yeah.
And they never hit that point again until they're actually humbled. Like, you see, so talk about like that point of humility and how it's helped continue through your walk, your journey.
So the question is, let's talk about humility, how to keep that going, or what that might look like.
Yeah.
And I'd even hope to have a shot at that. In California, the cards were in, and I admitted I tapped out. I don't think I had much in me, Andy, at that point to even answer that I even had humility. I was done. I was done. I will tell you, walking into Celebrate Recovery, into different meetings, that I would put myself up on different platforms or think that I didn't have problems. I was so morbidly embarrassed. That was putting acid on a fake shell that wore itself out when I started to see what a gift that these people were giving me that I didn't deserve, just like that cross. The gift that when Bob, as a spiritual father, gave me, to know a Jesus that loves me, that he just wants to keep refining me, he wants to keep going deeper, he wants to keep looking at these things. I learned to be okay with that surgery. I don't like it. It's hard sometimes. It's not fun. You hear a lot of this stuff like prosperity gospel and all this kind of stuff. Guys, he loves us enough to refine us and break us. It's okay. That is okay. It's not fun. That's when I start to see that I have no humility and I have a ton of pride, is when I'm sitting here, Andy, and no one can see me in the darkness of night when I'm reading my word, and I have to sit on this, or I have to start writing this out in my journal because I'm not getting it through my head, or especially to my heart.
Yeah. How do you balance that? Humility with the still feel have value? Because I see guys both, sometimes they struggle with, they just feel so self-deprecated because their sin is weighing heavy, but they can't release it.
It's a good question. We when I first met Bart Reed, he made a comment, and I'm like, dude, you are sort of hardcore. But when people get really upset and they're like on the edge, the question he'll ask him is like, what sin are you dealing with that we need to talk about? Because it's not about what we're messing around with. And I thought, man, that is a pretty like bullish question. I want to use other words right now, but I'm like, dude, you're hardcore. But it's really true that when I start, Don and I start going at it, I start getting really ticked off about something like that. It's a sin problem, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's having a place that they walk you through it. It's one thing to go, we have that worship night here on Saturday, and to feel Jesus, and the whole thing is going to be great. But what does it look like to walk through sin? And this is, again, what I learned from Bob Tucker. Love the sinner, hate the sin. It kept going over and over through codependency and everything like that, and allows you to differentiate those things. But as you walk through that, Andy, and you find that freedom in that, and you start to find those chains, you got to keep moving. Because it says biblically that even when a demon leaves a space, it will return with 7. Pay attention to those words. Everything in life we are to stand firm as men except for sexual sin. To answer that question, when you go to clean the house out, you men are make really sure that hedge is tight. That's why I felt is good to add in that deliverance prayer. Because they start to talk about Ouija boards, and they go into some of the craziest kinds of things, but when you start to look at what we even accept and what we do and what we'll hear, the other thing, every counseling session I did with Bob, there's always Christian music playing in the background. And I asked him why he did that, and he said it fills this space so Satan can't have even an inkling of the air in this room. And I'm like, that answers your question too. What am I doing and what am I surrounded by that I keep going? So tell you what, I may have gone there for porn or wine and lying and all the other stuff. I came out to realize that I struggled with food, struggled with other things. It's just deeper, and I can tell you the things that we've been listening to in the last week or two, it was really interesting. One of the biggest sins that we deal with as Christians is fear. Fear that I don't have enough, fear that you have too much, right? Pulls us off the altar. I'm like, man, Lord, I got a whole sense of fear that I've never even looked to put my arms around it. So to ask that question, Andy, I can sit in the same boat with whoever you're talking about, that I've got to look at these things. I got to get arms around it. Maybe I got to talk to a brother about it that holds me accountable. But I got to push through this with him and see what it is that he wants from me. And maybe it's something he doesn't release me from. Maybe that's something like the Apostle Paul talks about as a thorn that I've always got. And I've learned to be okay with it. It's sort of like food for me right now. Yeah. I love to eat. I'm like a hostage on release. It's just truth. But in the same breath, I know that it's a lot of other things too. Good question. The humble one's a hard one to ask.
That's good. Always walk with men who are constantly looking for the plank in their eye. Because it's hard to see sometimes.
And that's really what I love about with you guys out here, when I get the opportunity to talk to you and you guys start to open up about fears and what you're worried about, because I feel like I'm finally with my people. Because that's where I like to sit with the Lord, is that I don't know. I get to sit with the Lord, that Lord show me, examine my heart. This is what's truly a gift for me, this is what I love about the barn, is that you guys show up and we get to talk about this stuff. Anything else? Are you guys? We good?
Yeah, you can question that.
Yeah.
LFA. Anything you want. Come on, go. Hey.
Yeah.
Get after it.
Well, let me pray, and then I got a couple other things real quick. So, Lord Father, I thank you for tonight. Lord, I just ask that, Lord, first I thank you for just everything that you've done in my life, for my marriage, for my kids, my family. It is absolutely undeserved, and I thank you for the blood of your Son that has covered all my sins and iniquities. And Lord, I thank you. Lord, I thank you for these men. I thank you for their hearts. Lord, I ask that you soften the men that need to be softened. That, Lord, you fill them with a boldness for them to move, for them to realize that they have direction, that they have purpose. Lord, to work on anger, to work on fear, to work on insecurities. And Lord, as I ask that, I just ask that they feel your loving arms, because all those things can be comforted with that hold, that embrace. And Lord, it is knowing you as the true Father that allows an outpouring for us as broken earthly men to find a boldness in you and to live with purpose. And again, recircle into identity. We thank you, Jesus. I thank you for these men. In your name, Jesus, amen.
Amen.